You just hate me? Okay. Just gonna wait till you're done. Okay. Hello and welcome back. This week I'm excited because I am talking about Chad Disktoe's audiobook, Working Class Superheroes. So I found this on Twitter, actually, through the writing community. I'll link that down below. So I have always loved superheroes. When I was super little, I would cruise around half the time in either a Sleeping Beauty costume or a Batman costume. The Batman costume arguably a little bit more because it was so often that my mom had to put, like, well, she didn't have to, but she put a little bow on the ear so that people know I was a girl. This was before the whole raising kids without gender was, like, cool. Anyway, so I've always really liked superheroes. I like the comic books, I like the cartoons, I like the TV shows, the movies. So when it came time to, well, not when it came time, but when I found the opportunity to read a superhero book, I was really excited. That said, it's an audiobook, and if you remember my video / blog about the last time I listened to an audiobook, you know that's not my favorite medium. I'm slightly too much of a busybody because I don't like to just sit there with my headphones on or my phone going and just listening to the book. Like, I have to be taking a walk or like doing the dishes or like taking a shower or something. So already it's not like a legitimate strike against the book / story, but it kind of adds to my complaints. So the other thing that I realized, in addition to my already realized fact that audiobooks aren't my favorite, I think when it comes to superhero stories, I prefer visual media. So as much of a reader as I am, it was really kind of hard for me to take the story seriously, if that makes sense. Because for me at least, I think there's a certain amount of corniness that's just inherently part of the superhero genre. Like, think back to like the early days of comic books, or even just like the 1950s, like Adam West Batman. I can't believe I almost said Superman, but the Adam West Batman, when like they're having a fight scene and they literally go like pow, boom. Like, it's just a little bit corny. And the corniness has even like lended itself into more recent superhero stuff too. Like, I just recently rewatched most of Shazam, and they were like, you know, is there like a layer where there's like a waterfall or something? And then you kind of think about superhero layers and you're like, yeah, they are kind of all in these like really weird, secluded, or like super out in the open places. And so I think the corniness really works well in visual mediums, but in a book / audiobook format, it was just kind of too corny for me, if that makes sense. And it made it slightly more difficult to really appreciate the story. Now, that said, before you get the idea that I didn't like the book, I really did. I thought it was an interesting story. I thought the characters were pretty well fleshed out, and I thought the plot was pretty well thought out too. So right off the bat, it kind of gave me a little bit of like the Incredibles vibes. You know how like at the beginning of the very first movie, when Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl are like actually able to fight crime and then superheroes are banned, that's kind of what happens in this book. So it starts out in, I think it's the late 80s, I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but basically there's like this meteor shower, and then there's this like intergalactic like space dragon, and these superheroes got to fight it, but police officers get killed, and one of the superheroes gets killed, and one of the superheroes gets eaten, but then she survives because it's kind of like the scene in the Disney Hercules movie when the Hydra gets him and then he like chops the head off. It's basically that scene, just fewer heads. And then the government is like, we can't have mass vigilantes like out on the streets. Vigilantes are bad. Which then kind of reminded me of, honestly, a lot of other like superhero TV shows. Like, I think that was a really big thing in Arrow at one point. It's been a minute since I've seen Arrow. Anyway, so there's kind of that part of the story. And then there's fast forward to assumingly present day. And assumingly present day, and also like the alien invasion in like the 80s-ish. This all happens in a fictional town in America. It's kind of unclear to say what part of America. I'm thinking East Coast to like East Midwest-ish, but I'm not really sure exactly since, you know, fictional place. Anyway, and it follows primarily this kid Zeke, who was caught because his friend had pot and they got pulled over for like a taillight or something, and then he had to do like community service and everything. And so he kind of pulls like a Batman Iron Man, but the poor version, because he doesn't actually have money, but he's like, I want to make a difference and I want to try to bring justice to my community. Meanwhile, there are still superheroes, so it's not totally The Incredibles where they're like on the DL. They're just not as openly accepted as they were 40 years previously. So it follows three main superheroes. There's Magna-Man, who is essentially Superman, but he's from Uranus, which is another thing that kind of killed me and also lends to my corniness argument, because the narrator of the book kept saying Uranus and they kept making fart jokes. Well, not kept making, it only happened a couple times, but it was a couple too many in my opinion. Then there's also Speed Chicken, who's basically Flash, except he wears a chicken mask on, like, that's his costume. He doesn't have like super speed like suit that resists friction, so I don't know how that works in the physics world. He just has like a rubber chicken mask. And then there's Cambio, which, like, way to represent mi gente. That was exciting. He's from Puerto Rico and he's a shapeshifter, which, by the way, I don't know why everyone was like shitting on shapeshifting. I think that's a really cool power, and they made fun of him a lot for it, which didn't really make sense to me. Anyway, so it's like those three main superheroes, and then Zeke, who is kind of like the Cape Crusader, but he's Wombat, and he kind of like comes in, nobody takes him seriously because he doesn't actually have powers. Of course, there's the one guy in town who's like super against superheroes, and little do we know, but he's in cahoots with one of them. And the superhero, I'm not going to say who, but the superhero that anti-superhero dude is in cahoots with is actually the one pulling all the strings. And he like wants to get rid of this other planet because this other planet being Neptune, because Neptune destroyed Uranus, and then there's like a bunch of Neptunian refugees on this island, which is kind of like the Mascara. So then there's kind of like this Wonder Woman illusion in there too. So it was really cool too to see all of these references to like classic superheroes, and I honestly think it was pretty well done. It was just the corniness, like I said, was a little much for me at times. The other thing that, like, it's kind of bittersweet is, like I said, I think the plot is really interesting, and I don't know if I gave it justice in my brief and kind of vague summary, but I thought it was really cool how Descoteaux brought in all of these iconic superhero references and made it into his own story. And I thought that the whole intergalactic tensions and whatnot was really well thought out, and I kind of really liked the superhero turned supervillain vibe. I don't think it's overdone, actually. I think it's not done enough. And so that was really interesting and fun to listen to. But then it ended. And I don't know, maybe I just don't pay attention to when climaxes have happened in other books, but I feel like it was all this exposition and building and context, and then climax, and then it was like a chapter and a half, and the book was done. And I don't know, it just seemed like there was more that could have been had, and I felt like just the last probably about a quarter of the book just kind of went really quickly. But like I said, it was still really enjoyable. I would recommend. I think if you like superhero stories, it's really interesting. And to kind of get back to the title of working class superheroes, and even kind of my jab at Batman and Iron Man earlier, like at the beginning of the book, when superheroes were cool, they were government funded and they had all this money. But now, since they like kind of have to be on the DL but not really, they don't have that money, and a lot of them are working class. And so I think that's also a really interesting thing, because when you look at, like, even though when you Lois Lane and Diana Prince and literally any iteration of Flash, like Barry Allen, like, they aren't millionaires by any means. Like, they do have like normal day jobs that don't pay a whole lot, I would imagine, but at the same time, that's not really a focus. And so I thought it was really interesting that Descotteau gave it that relevance. So I would definitely recommend. I think I would probably have enjoyed it more if I could read it myself. It's nothing against the narrator, but since I'm already picky about audiobooks as is, I'm also picky about my narrators. And I still think maybe if it were like a graphic novel, I think that would have been a really good choice. Because, again, there's that certain level of corniness and like action and just superhero vibes that's just inherently visual. And even though I think Descotteau did a really good job with like the descriptions, that little like visual element was just missing slightly. So I do recommend. I just think it's not quite the right format for me. So that's all I have for Working Class Superheroes. Next week I will be reading Dark Wolf by Christine Feehan. I'm just a little ways in, not very much. I think it's like vampires and wolves, because there are Lycans and Carpathians. And Lycan has something to do with wolves, if I recall my Latin at all. Anyway, so I'm really excited to talk about this with you next week, and thank you so much.